Hello, welcome to this lesson in GCSE Biology. This is the next lesson in the pathogens and diseases topic, where we're going to be talking about diseases caused by fungi and protists. So let's get straight into it. The syllabus looks like this. So you've got a specified fungal disease there, which is a plant disease called rose black spot. And you've got a human disease caused by protists, possibly one of the most important, significant human diseases, which is malaria. I'm going to cover both of those in this lesson. So, the objectives go as follows: to revise pathogens and to look at this rose black spot in plants, and then to look at malaria in humans, which I think is actually one of the hardest parts of the syllabus. So we're going to be paying real attention when we get to that part. So, first activity, the thing I want you to do, is going to be various ones throughout this lesson, is pause the video here and try and do this word fill to revise how pathogens are spread. All of the words that you need are there. Pause the video now. Okay, we all done? So hopefully that is all finished. Let's move on. So pathogens, how are they spread? Your answers to that one should have read: the microorganisms which cause infectious diseases are called pathogens. Pathogens can either be protists, bacteria, fungi, or viruses. Those are the ones that you should have pulled out of the list there. They affect plants and animals. They can be spread by air, water, or direct contact, amongst other methods. Okay, so our first disease is our fungal disease for today, which is rose black spot. Now, there are fungal diseases that affect humans, athlete's foot and thrush being the most common ones of those. Generally, fungi don't cause as many problems as bacteria and viruses because they're very large cells. Therefore, they really struggle to get inside our cells, and they kick off an enormous immune response if they try. So this is a fungus that affects roses specifically. It can affect other plants as well. We call it rose black spot because it's commonly found on roses, and it makes the plant look like that. And again, if you're answering a question on this, you would talk about what effect that's going to have. It's going to stop the plant photosynthesizing, reducing the amount of glucose it's got, and therefore stopping it growing. It's not good for the plant. Okay, so how is it caused? Well, the black spot fungus produces these little spores which are released under wet conditions. So when it rains, they get splashed off the leaves into the soil or onto other plants. It can be passed by us or other animals, moving it from plant to plant. Now, these spores can survive the winter. They don't like the frost, so a good hard frost over the winter does actually keep these fungal diseases down. So one of the effects of climate change, having milder winters, is we're seeing more of these fungal diseases. So they can overwinter mostly on the shoots, but they can survive on fallen leaves and within the soil. And when plants start to grow up through the soil, then they get infected that way. Okay? So what can you do about it if you're a gardener? You want to protect your roses. Personally, not a big fan of roses too much. They look pretty, but you've got to do quite a bit with them to get something you can eat. So I prefer to grow things that you can actually eat. Once you spot the infected leaves, easiest thing to do is obviously cut them off, just like with tobacco mosaic virus, and make sure that those leaves go into disinfectant or get incinerated and kept away from all of your other plants. You can, of course, treat your rose with fungicide that you can buy there, although some people like to stay completely organic with their farming. They don't like to spray any fungicides, pesticides, herbicides around their garden. Some people take a sort of view in between. A bit of organic, just removal, and a bit of spray is quite useful. Okay, so this basically, when you do this, you've got to make sure you spray the entire plant. You've got to make sure you hit the stems. You've got to make sure you hit the tops and the bottoms of the leaves as well. So you've got to be really thorough, because otherwise your black spot's just going to come straight back. And it's quite tedious having to go around and spray the top and bottom of every single leaf. So possibly easier just to cut the bits off that are causing you a problem. So that's it on rose black spot. That's all you need to know. So you're going to pause the video here, and what I want you to do is write down in notes somewhere the following things. These are the things you need to know: what rose black spot is, how it's transmitted, what it looks like on the leaf, how it is treated. Do that now. Make sure you've got that set, because the next bit is really tricky. Okay, so pause the video here. Do that now. All done? Excellent. Now, as I say, I think the next bit, the bit on malaria, is really quite difficult. It's quite a high level part of the syllabus. Okay, and I'm going to leave the hardest bit to the very end. So we're going to build up to that bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about what malaria is and what it does first. Okay, so it's a disease caused by a protist. There's your syllabus. It says the malarial protist has a life cycle that includes the mosquito. Right, so the mosquito is integral into its life cycle. Malaria causes recurrent episodes of fever and can be fatal. Spread of malaria is controlled by preventing the vectors, mosquitoes, from breeding and using mosquito nets to avoid being bitten. There are various other things you can do as well as we go along. So obviously I'm pretty sure you know what a mosquito looks like. There's the picture there. But what you might not know is what a protist, a malaria protist, looks like swimming around amongst your blood cells, which is what that picture on the right there is. Now those are malaria protists swimming around in the blood of someone infected with malaria. But the malaria parasite only looks like that at one stage of its development. Okay, so it's got a very complicated and weird life cycle. Okay, so that's what it looks like. Why are we talking about it? Why is it on the syllabus? Well, it is an incredibly important human disease. It's an incredibly sort of suffering and death, mortality causing disease. Okay, so to give you this picture again, I know we've used this graph before, but to look at where malaria is in context, malaria is just here. Okay, so this is causing 2,002-ish deaths every day. When you compare that to some of the other big hitters, it's up there with HIV, pneumonia, and obviously COVID, coronavirus, is up here now at 2,309 deaths a day, so a bit higher, but bear in mind that's only for a few months. All right, that's emerged this year for a few months, and the effect it's had on the global economy. Malaria is doing this every single day of every single year. Okay, to give you the figures, in 2003 we had 934,000 people dying of malaria. That has got better. There's been a concerted effort to try and prevent more malaria. So by 2017, which is the latest figures available, we were down to 619,000, down by a third, but over 500,000 people every year still dying of malaria. And they're mostly children, and they're mostly in sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, this is a disease that, unlike COVID, which affects the elderly, this tends to affect young people. It tends to affect people under the age of 5. Okay, so it's a deadly and damaging and really harmful disease. Okay, so that's why it's on the syllabus, basically, because it's important. So these are the places where it occurs. Now, testing your geography here, you might be able to think of why it occurs there, what's special about those areas. Of course, many of you might know those are the tropics. So those are the places where it's warm all year round, pretty much. Okay, and what's temperature got to do with it? So as you come further up, you get less and less malaria. Now, this map I think is a little out of date because with climate change, with the warming climate, we are starting to see malaria creep north, and there are even some reports that it's been found being transmitted in southern Italy. Now, again, I don't know how true that is, but these are early reports, so it is moving northwards towards Europe. Okay, so why is it only those? It doesn't take a genius to work out, if you know your geography, you know what the climate's like in those equatorial regions, that it's to do with the vector, to do with the mosquito itself. So there's a mosquito biting biting a human, right? It's only one species of mosquito that actually carries malaria, and it's only the females. So it's female Anopheles mosquitoes. Okay, they carry this protist. Now there are actually 5 species of protist that can cause you illness, but the 2 most common ones are Plasmodium falciparum and Plasmodium vivax. Right, I never did Latin, so you'll have to excuse my pronunciation. And actually, if you've got a colder environment, frost kills mosquitoes. Frost kills mosquito eggs. Mosquitoes like still, fresh water to reproduce in. Stagnant ponds are their favourite, and if they freeze, it kills them. So if you have an area where every year you get some frosts and you get very cold weather, you don't have malarial transmission, okay, which is obviously a good thing. So that's what a plasmodium looks like. Now, you are not specifically required to know exactly all of the structures in a plasmodium the way you are in a bacteria or an animal cell or plant cell, but you can see it's got a lot of things that are similar and a lot of things that look a bit different. So it's obviously got a nucleus, Right, that's got mitochondria to release energy, and a lot of those other features listed on there you won't encounter until A level. So don't worry too much about the structure, but I would say it's a little bit, has some features in common with bacteria, some features in common with us, right, but it is its own distinct form of life, these plasmodium parasites. And they change depending on their life cycle. So, what happens if you get malaria? Well, symptoms-wise, you get repeated bouts of fever because the malaria is attacking your blood, and as it bursts out of your blood cells, it causes your body to go into a fever reaction to try and fight it off, and that fever can be fatal. Okay? Now, treatment is quite straightforward. The prevention, if you are ever travelling to areas that are malarial, you'll be strongly encouraged to take one of 3 anti-malarial medications. That one in the top right is probably the most common for short trips, Malarone, if you're there for a short amount of time because it gives you protection quite quickly and you only have to take it for a week after you come back. There is another one called doxycycline, which is slightly nicer to your body in terms of your physiology, which you have to take for much, much longer. So if you're in the malarial area for a long time, you might choose doxycycline. Okay, I've been on Malarone a number of times in malarial areas, and it is a horrible drug. I don't like it at all, but it is much, much, much better than getting malaria, of course. And famously, of course, Cheryl Cole decided not to take her anti-malarials and went to a malarial region. She decided to take homeopathic versions instead, which had no scientific backing. And guess what happened? She got malaria. So much better if you are going to a malarial area to take the drugs as instructed by your doctors. So we should all know as well the most useful thing you can do actually is prevent yourself from getting bitten. Okay, not always easy in malarial areas, but sleeping under mosquito nets and insecticide soaked mosquito nets is probably the best way, as you can see that picture there in the middle. And a lot of the charities working in these areas are distributing these nets to various people. Now the word vector is on your syllabus, so it is one you have to know. Now this is a vector-borne disease. A vector is a disease that requires an organism to carry it from one host to the other. So that's what the vector is. It carries the disease from one to another. So a vector is an organism that carries a disease into others. Okay, so disease vectors could be rats or fleas in various places, but in this case, the vector is our specific female mosquito. Okay, now don't get the idea it's all mosquitoes, because it isn't. There are lots of mosquitoes that are very, very important in all food chains, and if we killed them all, which might be the suggestion some people would have, we would cause massive problems, much, much bigger, in fact, in terms of food chains than malaria itself. So there are various things we can do, stopping ourselves getting bitten, and also using preventative drugs where necessary. Okay. Now, fun fact, one of the first anti-malarial drugs was this thing called quinine, this substance called quinine. Now, quinine, as you can see the vintage health advert there on the right, quinine comes from the, I'm going to get this wrong, is the cinchona tree, right, which grows in the Americas and was known by the local indigenous people as the so-called fever tree. Because if you took its bark and you boiled it up, you got a tea from it and took that extract, very bitter extract it was, you basically could reduce fevers and help treat symptoms of things like malaria. Okay, but quinine's incredibly bitter, really, really bitter substance, so it was mixed with water and various fruits and sweetening agents, and that gave you tonic water. Okay, because tonics is an old-fashioned word for something that's a medicine. It's a tonic for the disease, and tonic water was this mixture of quinine, fruits, sweeteners, that kind of thing. And actually, the fact that that particular tree was known as the fever tree is where a particularly famous brand of tonic water gets its name from. And it was used as treatment for malaria in the early days of various Western European people moving to areas of the tropics. They would be asked to take quinine, and quite often do this through taking tonic water, and quite often through a lot of gin and tonics. So there are lots of old military stories about people across empire and the British Empire taking anti-malarial drugs in the form of gin and tonic. Okay, now obviously taking the quinine is more effective. Just you'd have to drink an awful lot of gin and tonics to get a protective effect, and the gin would do you more damage than pretty much anything else. So there's a vintage picture. Another fun fact about tonic water and quinine is it's luminous under UV light. So if you've got a black light, a UV light of any sort, and you go shine it at a bottle of tonic water, you will get a super cool glowing effect. Right? But you didn't know that. So that's basically just the nice gentle lead in to the hard bit. I'm afraid this is quite tricky. This is properly the level 9 GCSE material. So if you are unhappy with this, you can rewind this, go back over this a few times. So you should know these terms already: sexual and asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction is when an organism needs two parents and half the genetic material combined to make a new organism, mixes up the genes and gives you variation and no two identical creatures. Okay? Asexual reproduction is essentially cloning, and lots of organisms reproduce by asexual cloning, like asexual reproduction, like bacteria, some plants, various things like that. Now, there's two different types of cell division, which we will go into in more detail in the biology GCSE as we go into year 10, so on and so forth. And those are meiosis, which is the one that makes gametes, sperm and egg, that kind of stuff, and mitosis, which is the one that's basically just cells replicating. Now, the complicated thing about malaria is it does both at different times of its life cycle. Okay, so it does both at different times of its life cycle. I'm going to try and explain how that works, and the mosquito is absolutely key in all of this. So here's one of my patented Mr. Gill PowerPoint diagrams. So first thing that happens, let's start with a female mosquito of that particular species that has is infectious, has the malaria parasite in its mouth parts, in its salivary glands, ready to go. So on the left hand here is going to be all the stuff that happens in the mosquito, and on the right hand here is going to be all the stuff that happens in humans. And the only way that that line in the middle gets crossed is via the vector, is via mosquito bites. Okay, so the mosquito bites a person, and from the saliva in goes the malaria parasite, okay, into the person's blood. That's very quickly taken round to the liver, where the malarial parasite starts to reproduce asexually by mitosis, like that. Okay, so round and round and round it goes, building up, building up, building up. And some of those malarial parasites, in their mitotic asexual reproduction mode, will escape into the blood. They will get into the blood, and they will go around the body, and they'll start colonizing red blood cells and then bursting out of them, much like a very, very big virus. And it's that damage to the red blood cells and that effect on your blood that causes the bouts of fever and anemia that can be fatal. Okay, so I'll show you some pictures there. Look, on the left of that little picture, we've got a red blood cell that's normal, and on the right you can see that one is full of malarial parasites ready to burst out. We've got another one under a light microscope, standard histology as it's called, where you can see all the normal red blood cells around that one in the middle that's full of malarial parasites. So round and round and round they go, all right, building up the numbers, but they're bursting out of red blood cells. But to go back to the picture you saw at the beginning of the parasites swimming around blood, some of them go into what's called a sexual form in red blood cells. Okay, they essentially become a form that can reproduce sexually, not asexually, and a percentage of them do this. Now this is where they have to go then back into the mosquito. Okay, and this is where another bite happens. So an uninfected female mosquito comes along, bites the human who's infected, and takes these sexual form of the malaria parasite back into the mosquito side. So this is all now inside the mosquito. So over here on this side, we're all inside the mosquito. So these sexual forms of red blood cell, these sexual forms in the red blood cells, the mosquito digests the red blood cells, out they come. The conditions are very different in a mosquito. The temperature is different, pH is different. This signals the malaria to go into its sexual reproduction stage, where they burst out, and two of these asexual reproducing things, two of these sexual forms that come from a human, just fuse together. So we're down at the bottom here. They fuse together, okay, mixing up their genes, and they then go through meiosis, which is basically the production of a half cell that's got one set of chromosomes, as you can see up here, one set of chromosomes, and then these make their way into the mosquito's mouth parts. Okay, now all that bit down here happens in the mosquito's gut, all that digestion of the blood and so on and so forth. Once all that bit's done, these bits make their way back into the mosquito's mouth parts, into its salivary glands, and the whole cycle starts over again. Okay, Now, that is obviously a very, very complicated life cycle. I say it's one of the most complicated things we're asked to present to you in the GCSE, I think. Okay, and I have left some detail out. If you're really keen, that was quite straightforward. Go read about what it is that triggers them to change the mode in which they live and precisely how they get in and out of the cells and the interaction with the liver and the lungs. It's all really interesting, but it's high level stuff. Okay, the key point though is if we can interrupt this vector, if we can do something to the mosquito, get rid of the mosquito, stop the mosquito from biting us, and transmitting that bacteria, that parasite around, then we've basically interrupted the life cycle. That's a good thing. Okay, so that's the life cycle. What I want you to, I'm not going to present you any more new ideas, but what I want you to do now, and this should take a little bit of time, okay, is to find, draw, print, carve, balloon model, bake, whatever, a diagram of the malarial life cycle. Make it creative, make it interesting, so it gets into your head. So you've had to think about this process, okay? And then identify bits that you don't understand. Come back to the video, do your own research, okay? Do that. That should take you a fair amount of time. And please do send me any particularly interesting versions that you've got. I would love to see what you're cooking up, what you're making in terms of your malaria life cycle. Most creative wins. I will think of some sort of prize and reward to get to you as and when we can do so. Okay, so hopefully by next week I'll be able to have a few of those to show, and I'll be able to reward those people who've done an excellent job. And then to make sure that you've got notes wise, right, these are the questions. Okay, and I'm going to ask you to pause the video here, and then the very last bit of the video is going to be the answers. Okay, so you can pause here, do this, come back to this once this is all done. The questions are: what type of pathogen causes malaria? What are the symptoms of malaria? Can it be fatal? How is the protist, it says protest there, typo I'm afraid. How is the protist passed from one person to another? Why do scientists call the mosquito a vector? What do we mean by a vector? How can we stop mosquitoes from breeding? And how can we prevent mosquitoes from biting humans? Okay, and if you want some extension work, you can go on to look into all the genetic manipulation we've been doing to mosquitoes to try and reduce the spread of this one particular species of mosquito, to reduce the spread of malaria, which has given us some incredible results. But again, this is a tough bit of the syllabus, and if you can get your head around it super easily, well done you. If you need to go over it a few times, also great. Okay, so pause the video now. Go away, do those tasks, come back, and I'll do the videos. I'll do the answers at the end of this video when you have finished. So pause the video now, please. Okay, I hope it is some significant amount of time later, and that you've done something wonderfully creative and answered those questions in your books. So here's our answers. The type of pathogen that causes malaria is a protist. The malaria symptoms: recurrent bouts of fever. Can it be fatal? Yes, it can. How is the protist passed from one person to another? Well, when a mosquito, which is the blood of an infected person, bites someone else, and you can look back at the life cycle that you've just made. Why do we call it a vector? Well, it carries the protist from one person to another. How can we stop mosquitoes from breeding? We can either drain water away, use insecticide, use some genetic techniques. However, these do have impacts on ecosystems, and there's a cost benefit to weigh up there. And how can we prevent mosquitoes from biting humans? Sleeping under mosquito nets at night so mosquitoes can't bite, and obviously when you're in the tropics, wearing insect repellent, things like DEET, and long-sleeved, long-leg clothes to stop them from biting you. Okay, so that is a complicated lesson. I hope that made sense. I look forward to seeing what you've managed to make. Do send that on through to me, and I will very much enjoy having a look. Okay, thanks very much. See you next week.